we'll start with this. Ring IQ's 2020 Prospect of the Year, Melissa Odessa, took to her Instagram account and left a caption that reads, "NABF title was nice, but I crave a world title. So who would I like to fight for it? Well, I'll tell you. Now, having 3 belts in 3 different weight divisions, congrats to Daniela Bermudez on the junior featherweight IBF title. How about I be your first title defense? I've got a date. I've got a location. Main event cards are meant to be exciting, so let's bring it. I have no problem being on the B side. I've been there before. It doesn't faze me. So let's have my people talk to your people, and let's talk IBF." This is the second active reigning world champion that up-and-comer Melissa Odessa has called out for a world title fight. She very recently called out Mexico's own Usyk Luna, the reigning WBC champion in the bantamweight division, and currently she's calling out Daniela Bermudez, the reigning IBF super bantamweight champion.
2 champions at 2 different weights.
It's important to note that here today, Daniela Bermudez is registered as a champion in 2 different weight classes with 2 different sanctioning bodies. She's currently holding the WBO title at bantamweight and the IBF title at super bantamweight. No telling what's going to happen there. Is she going to decide to hang on to both of those titles and defend them simultaneously, or will she decide to campaign as a super bantamweight from here on out? It's not the first time that Daniela Bermudez has gone up in weight and won a title in the 122-pound division. Better still, there is the matter of Melissa Odessa's call-out to be addressed. Melissa Odessa here today sports a professional record of 3 wins and no losses. I like the energy coming from Melissa Odessa. I like that she's choosing to call out champions. She's choosing to fight for a title with a titleist as opposed to calling out another prospect like herself. You know, she could be calling out Shannon Courtenay. She could be calling out Rachel Ball. She could be calling out Ebony Bridges.
She could be calling out prospects like herself.
If she did, I wouldn't be averse to it. These are the kind of professional rivalries that bring attention to a weight class, to a division, to the sport. So I'm not against that kind of enthusiasm. But rather than calling out girls who really have yet to prove themselves in these weight classes, in these divisions, Melissa Odessa, Ring IQ's 2020 Prospect of the Year, is calling out seasoned veterans, grizzled vets, world champions.
Instead of prospects.
And you know there's a vacant title floating around at 118 pounds, the WBA title. Currently, that title isn't being held by anyone. Rather than being opportunistic and shooting for that title, Melissa Odessa wants the opportunity to earn a title in the ring against a champion. So do I think that Daniela Bermudez is going to bite? Do I think that Daniela Bermudez is going to be receptive to this call out? I think it's important to note that Daniela Bermudez is no stranger to traveling into hostile territory. You know, she went to Mexico to fight Bobby Juarez. She not only went to Mexico to fight Bobby, that's where she beat Bobby. Very recently, Daniela Bermudez was set to travel over to Russia to take on unbeaten prospect Tatiana Zrazevskaya. But, you know, Daniela's father and trainer, he had contracted COVID, so those plans were dashed. Better still, Daniela has fought on foreign soil before.
She has.
And I think it's important to be mindful of that before I say what I'm about to say. I'm not convinced that Daniela Bermudez is going to be receptive to this call-out. I'm not convinced that Daniela Bermudez
coming here
is going to travel to the United States in the near future to lock horns with Melissa Odessa in defense of her IBF title, her newly obtained IBF title, or the one that she was already holding,
the WBO,
at 118 pounds. I'm not convinced that Daniela Bermudez is going to defend either her 118-pound WBO title or her 122-pound IBF title against Melissa Odessa in the near future. Daniela Bermudez was very recently in action last month, at the beginning of December. She won the title. I mean, I like the call-out. I'm all for the call-out. I'm all for the gamesmanship and the enthusiasm. But here today, I do question what dollar amount would it take to get Daniela Bermudez to get on a plane, come over here stateside, and defend those titles against, you know, Melissa Odessa. You know, what's it going to take?
What kind of money are we talking about?
The Havoc Advisory, which helps to manage the career of Melissa Odessa, has entered into a partnership with people over there at MTK Global. So I do think there is a possibility that the funds can be put up, that the funds exist. I mean, I wouldn't rule it out. I just question whether or not Daniela Bermudez is receptive to this here today at this time. would also add that, Daniela Bermudez, she's not just any world champion in the sport of boxing. She's actually ranked on several pound-for-pound lists, Ring IQ included.
She's a legend killer.
She beat the very accomplished Bobby Juarez in Bobby Juarez's native Mexico, and she beat very accomplished fighter in her own countrywoman, Tigresa Acuña, over there in Argentina. Daniela Bermudez, she's no fucking joke. There are easier paths to a world title opportunity than the path that young Melissa Odessa is proposing. She's got guts calling out Daniela Bermudez, of all people, because I reiterate, there's a vacant title right there at 118 pounds, but that's not the way that Melissa wants to go about things. Apparently not.
I like her spirit.
Decorated amateur that Melissa has been, promising prospect that she is here today. Perhaps Daniela is a bit too much, too soon, because she's only got a pro record at 3-0, There's more work needs doing. And I'm not completely convinced that Daniela Bermudez is going to bite. I'm not convinced that this fight happens in the near future. It is something that could very well happen down the line. But I don't expect to see this fight in the next 1 to 2, maybe 3 matchups. I don't. In heavyweight news, per tweet from Michael Benson, Eddie Hearn has confirmed that Alexander Usyk is now out of contract with Matchroom. Unless the Anthony Joshua fight happens next, Usyk is WBO mandatory, but the priority is obviously AJ versus Tyson Fury. And, all the talks in reference to AJ versus Fury, they have been encouraging. I mean, very recently, in passing, I saw a clip where Eddie Hearn, Mr. Eddie Hearn himself, said that he's 90% confident the AJ versus Fury fight happens this year. We talked about here on the channel how Anthony Joshua himself said he actually reached out to Alexander Usyk.
But he's a reasonable guy.
Some previous reports indicated that perhaps Alexander Usyk was changing his tune, that he was hinting at stepping aside in order to allow the big undisputed heavyweight title fight to take place. I'll tell you the truth that in spite of Alexander Usyk being out of contract with Matchroom, he can leverage that situation and use it to make himself a bit of coin and get what he wants out of all of this. And what he wants is his title shot.
He can still get it.
And more. It's not a question of whether or not Alexander will get his title shot so much as when.
If he's willing to step aside.
The people over there at Matchroom can make it worth his while. I mean, who's to say that they can't leverage the situation to make a bit of coin, perhaps take in a lighter touch, an interim fight, as to not allow the ring rust to collect.
Right.
Maybe he gets himself a spot on the undercard of Joshua versus Fury.
There's a lot of ways they can play this thing.
So even if Usyk is out of contract, that doesn't have to be a hindrance. That doesn't have to be an obstacle. It wouldn't make sense for him to go anywhere else. At this point, it wouldn't make sense for him to go to Queensbury, a Top Rank, a Sorland, or the PBC. The PBC least of all.
Why the fuck would he go there?
When it's Matchroom that has everything he wants. Matchroom that has everything he needs.
He might enter into a new contract with Matchroom. I don't see why he wouldn't.
At a time when what side of the street a fighter is on is quite important to what fights are thereby made possible to the fighter, this news that Usyk is currently out of contract with Matchroom, it might seem alarming at first until you process it that where the hell else is he going to go to get what he wants? Might seem presumptuous of me, but I don't look at this news, I don't look at this revelation as being all that big of a deal.
It's nothing a little step-aside money can't fix.
It's nothing that a renewed contract, a renewed relationship with Matchroom can't iron out.
This might all be a non-issue.
Wouldn't spend too much time worrying about this development. I wouldn't spend too much time worrying about this revelation. I'm rather confident that Usyk is going to stay on the Matchroom side of things, and what needs to be ironed out will be ironed out in order to make that Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury undisputed heavyweight title fight possible. In light heavyweight news, ahead of his upcoming world title opportunity, contender Joe Smith Jr. says, "I'd like to get the Beterbiev fight right away." Joe Smith Jr. says he will target an immediate unification with Artur Beterbiev if he beats Maxim Vlasov for the vacant WBO light heavyweight title on February 13th. So y'all may or may not be aware, late last month, Artur Beterbiev, reigning unified light heavyweight champion Artur Beterbiev, he tested positive for COVID-19. So that fight that he was supposed to have
Late this month.
You know, they're talking about pushing that thing all the way out till the spring months. That's several months into this year, several months into 2021. I just so happen to think that, you know what, the sooner you can get Artur Beterbiev in the ring, the better, because this guy's got a lot of ring rust, a lot of cobwebs to have to shake off. That's the second postponement Artur has had to deal with. The first one was, he broke a rib. The second one, contracted COVID-19, and this guy, he ain't no spring chicken. This ain't some tween. You're talking about a guy who's in his mid-30s.
Time is of the essence.
I can't stress that enough ahead of this upcoming Joe Smith Jr. Maxim Vlasov fight for what is the vacant WBO title. I think that Joe Smith Jr. stands a very good chance of winning that fight, and that's not optimism for the sake of optimism. I've had a look at Maxim Vlasov. He's a big guy, he can move a bit, can punch a bit, some durability there, but Joe Smith Jr., he's coming into his own, he's showing improvement, and he's enthusiastic about what the future might hold. I think he's going to try his best to plow his way through Maxim Vlasov to get to Artur.
That's who he really wants.
You could argue that if Artur retains his 2 world titles in the spring, and Joe Smith Jr. becomes the WBO light heavyweight champion, and those two guys fight, regardless of who wins, regardless of who the winner is, whoever it is, they'll have a very solid argument to be entered into
the ring IQ pound for pound list.
That's right. Because the winner of that fight will be in possession of 3 of the 4 major titles in the light heavyweight division. Currently, Errol Spence Jr., unified welterweight champion Errol Spence Jr., he's ranked at number 10 on the ring IQ pound for pound list. He's in the most danger of being bumped off. And Errol's in possession of 2 of the 4 world titles in the welterweight division, whereas the winner of this fight would be in possession of 3. Only 1 belt away from becoming that division's undisputed champion. And if that winner just so happens to be Artur, who's already taken out an active reigning unbeaten world champion in Alexander Vlasov, if Artur manages to take out Joe,
he'll tie Errol Spence Jr.
for having beaten 2 active reigning world champions to Errol Spence Jr.'s 2, with the difference being the proverbial tiebreaker, the number of world titles they're currently in possession of. Artur would be in possession of 1 more world title than Errol Spence Jr., giving him the precedence to bump Errol off the list. I mean, we are thinking several months down the line, but that could happen if it happens the other way around. If it's Joe Smith Jr. that beats Artur, it does get a little bit more contentious, because Artur will have been the first active reigning world champion that Joe Smith Jr. would have beaten. The first champion that was in possession of a world title, the first active reigning world champion, Joe would have 1 champion's scalp under his belt, whereas Errol would still have 2, even though Joe would be in possession of more alphabet titles than Errol. Thus, it does become a little bit more contentious if it happens the other way, if Joe ends up beating Artur. Nevertheless, it's going to make for some interesting conversations moving forward into 2021. And finally, you might have heard last couple of days that Anthony Joshua was broaching retirement talks. He was quoted as saying, "I'm coming towards the end of my career. When you see the next Olympics happen is when I'll be coming to the end of my career, and the next generation will be coming through." What Anthony Joshua is essentially talking about is retiring in approximately the next 4 to 5 years. 4 to 5 years, 2 fights a year. That's roughly in another 10 fights, 10 professional bouts, 10 professional boxing matches for world titles, one would assume. And, maybe this kind of talk seems premature to some, but I think about Anthony Joshua's career, how it's been. This is a fighter who debuted in 2013, and by 2016, 3 years into his pro career, he was already fighting for a world title and fighting in defense of a world title. Following year, he unifies, becomes a unified world champion. That's 4 years into his professional career. Anthony Joshua has had approximately 25 professional boxing matches, and 10 of those boxing matches have been world title fights. So this is a guy who's essentially already competed at the highest levels as an amateur, becoming an Olympic gold medalist, and is currently competing at the highest levels as a professional. One might feel so inclined to ask why Anthony Joshua is even broaching this subject. I mean, if he's got another 4 to 5 years left in him, why is he talking about this now? Well, did you guys forget what's going on? Did you guys forget what fight they're trying to make for Anthony Joshua? The Tyson Fury fight. The fight that's supposed to be for the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world. Need I remind you that there are a lot of champions that come and go in the sport of boxing, and how they become champions varies from person to person. But not very many of those champions get to call themselves unified, and even less get to call themselves undisputed.
Anthony Joshua is very close to that.
He's very close now to that last brass ring, that last puzzle piece of the heavyweight puzzle. The WBC title, the very elusive WBC title that has escaped him the last 2-3 years. I'll reiterate to you guys what I said in our previous segment. Eddie Hearn here today is saying that he's about 90% sure that the Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury fight happens this year.
90% sure.
On this 5-year plan of Anthony Joshua's, this 5-year plan, this albeit very idealized 5-year plan, there's plenty of time in there for Anthony Joshua to fight for the undisputed heavyweight championship this year. And if he is successful, if he stays in the winner's bracket, if he becomes the undisputed heavyweight champion of this era, he'll have plenty of time to have several title defenses in the next 4 to 5 years. An ideal reign for a heavyweight champion. Almost too good to be true. But it is possible, because Anthony Joshua has been a professional boxer for approximately 8 years. And for the better portion of those 8 years, he's been fighting in world title fights.
He has.
Against world champions, against top 10 contenders. For the better portion of this man's career, he's been competing at the highest levels of the sport. If he becomes undisputed this year...
Another 4 to 5 years is realistic.
In another 4 to 5 years, Anthony Joshua will be approximately, 35, 36 years old? Maybe 37? It's a realistic goal to retire in another 4 to 5 years during the next Olympic cycle.
So I get it.
I understand what thought processes Anthony Joshua might be going to, what thought processes he might be going through whilst he's on the eve of what could very well be the biggest fight of his career against his biggest adversary. Ultimately, we don't know exactly what the future holds. But given what's going on, I understand where this sentiment might have come from on the part of Anthony Joshua.